This video is the full story of Tupac Shakur and the notorious b.i.g. Not the beef everyone can recite, but the friendship underneath it. By the end, you'll know what really happened in that New York lobby in 1994, why Tupac died believing his own brother had set him up, and why a Las Vegas courtroom is finally hearing the case this August. Everyone knows how Tupac Shakur died. Almost nobody knows about the friendship he lost years before the bullets, or that the man he spent his final years calling his enemy had once slept on his couch. To understand how it ended, you have to see how it started. And it started with love, rather than war. They met in 1993 in Los Angeles. Tupac was already becoming a star, magnetic and brilliant and impossible to ignore. Christopher Wallace was a broke, unknown kid from Brooklyn who was not yet the legend the world would call Biggie. He asked to be introduced, and Tupac invited him back to his house. Here's the part the documentaries rush past. Tupac took him under his wing. When Biggie was still nobody, Pac fed him, brought him out on stage, and handed him advice nobody else was offering. He let him stay at his place in LA whenever he was in town. Biggie looked up to him the way you look up to the older brother who got out first. And then Biggie asked him for something that tells you exactly how deep that trust ran. He asked Tupac to be his manager. Tupac said no. Not because he doubted him, but because he thought Biggie was already in better hands than his own. Stay with Puff, he told him. He'll make you a star. Sit with that for a second, because it is the cruelest detail in this entire story. The most consequential piece of advice Tupac Shakur ever gave anyone was to send his little brother to Bad Boy Records. Within 2 years, he would be convinced that everybody at Bad Boy wanted him dead. So how do two men who genuinely loved each other end up as the faces of a war that kills them both? It wasn't the music, and it wasn't the coasts, at least not at first. It was a single night in a single lobby that detonated everything. On November 30th, 1994, Tupac walked into a New York recording studio, and he walked out convinced that the people he trusted most had just tried to end his life. Nothing after that night was ever the same again. November 30th, 1994, Tupac takes a call about recording a verse at a studio in Manhattan. Quick money, an easy session, nothing about it worth remembering. He heads over with a few people around him, and the moment he steps into that lobby, his entire life splits in half. But the shooting itself is not the part that would haunt him. It's what he saw on the way out. Pac was ambushed in the lobby by armed men, shot 5 times, and robbed of around $40,000 worth of jewelry. He survived, barely. And here's the detail that lit the fuse for everything that followed. Waiting upstairs in that same building on that same night were Biggie, Sean Combs, and most of the Bad Boy camp. The people Tupac counted as family. So put yourself where he was. You have just been shot in a building where your closest friends happen to be sitting 1 floor up. Were they part of it? Did they know it was coming? Or was it the worst coincidence anybody has ever had? Tupac did not wait around to find out. In his mind, the answer was already written. The people upstairs, including the brother he had fed and mentored, had at best let it happen, and at worst arranged it. Now, was any of that true? No evidence has ever tied Biggie or Sean Combs to that night. Both denied it, flatly and repeatedly, for the rest of Biggie's life. But here is the thing about betrayal. It does not have to be real to be devastating. Tupac believed it all the way down, and that belief was about to become the most dangerous force in hip-hop. Because a wounded, furious, brilliant Tupac was about to be offered a way out of a jail cell by the one man in music who could turn all that pain into a weapon. By 1995, Tupac was sitting in a New York prison, convicted in a sexual abuse case he insisted he was innocent of, broke, and abandoned by most of the industry that had made money off him. And one man saw an opportunity that nobody else was willing to take. His name was Suge Knight, he ran Death Row Records, and he was already one of the most feared figures in American music. What Suge put on the table was not really a record deal. On October 12, 1995, Tupac walked out of prison on $1.4 million of bail, and he walked straight onto death row. Worth noting, because it is the kind of detail that gets flattened out of the legend. Court documents later indicated the money actually came from death row's distributors rather than Suge's own pocket. But that is not how it felt in the moment, and how it felt is what mattered. To a man who believed the entire world had turned on him, Suge Knight looked like the only person on earth willing to fight for him. How do you repay somebody who frees you when everyone else left you to rot? You give them everything you have, and Tupac did exactly that. Here is what almost nobody says out loud though. Signed to death row did not heal Tupac. It armed him. Suge did not want the poet, the kid who wrote about his mother and about single mothers and about the pain of the streets. He wanted the soldier. He wanted the fury. And Tupac, still certain that Bad Boy had tried to kill him, had fury to spare. The two of them needed each other's rage, and between them, they poured petrol on a fire that was already burning. The result was Hit 'Em Up, one of the most savage records ever committed to tape, aimed directly at Biggie and everyone standing near him. This was not a rap battle anymore. It was personal, and it was a declaration of war on the man who used to sleep at his house. But the deeper damage was what all of it did to Tupac himself. The more completely he became Death Row's weapon, the more the real Tupac disappeared behind the character he was playing. And that character was about to cost him his life. To understand what killed Tupac Shakur, you have to understand a contradiction that lived inside him, because there were always two of him, and most people only ever met one. The first Tupac was the poet. Raised by a Black Panther mother, he read Shakespeare and studied ballet, and he wrote "Dear Mama" and "Keep Ya Head Up." In interviews, he spoke with a tenderness and an intelligence that could stop you cold. He wrote about single mothers, about poverty, about the dignity of people the world had decided not to look at. That Tupac wanted to fix things. The second Tupac was Thug Life, a persona he built deliberately and then tattooed across his own stomach, the armored soldier who feared nothing and answered every threat with force. So which one was the real him? That question is why this is a tragedy rather than a headline, because the truth seems to be that Pac built the mask to survive, and then the mask started running the man. The angrier the world made him, the harder he leaned on Thug Life, until there was almost nowhere left for the poet to stand. People close to him in that last year described someone who could see the character he had invented dragging him toward an early grave and could not work out how to take it off. He said as much himself in different ways, over and over. He talked about death coming for him. He recorded music at a frantic, almost unnatural pace, like a man racing a clock only he could hear. He was right to be afraid, because the war he and Death Row had declared was no longer just words on a record. It was about to follow him to a warm September night in Las Vegas, and this time there would be no walking out of the lobby. September 7th, 1996, Las Vegas. Tupac is riding high. New money, new power. A Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand, and a seat in Suge Knight's BMW afterwards. For one night, everything looks like it is finally going his way. But something had already happened that evening that almost nobody in that car understood the weight of. Not long after the fight, Tupac and his entourage were filmed by hotel security cameras beating a man in the MGM Grand lobby. His name was Orlando Anderson, and a confrontation traced back to Death Row's entanglements on the street. The whole thing lasted seconds. Pac walked away and got on with his night. That scuffle followed him into the dark. Later that night, stopped at a red light at a Las Vegas intersection, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside them, and somebody inside it opened fire. Tupac was hit multiple times. He fought for 6 days. And here is the part that still aches. As he lay in that hospital, it was the poet, not the soldier, that the world quietly prayed for. On September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur died. He was 25 years old. That should have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Because 6 months later, on the other side of the country, the second half of this tragedy played out like somebody had run the whole thing again in a mirror. 6 months. That is all the time that separates the two deaths that defined hip-hop forever. What happened to Biggie was not just another murder. It was an echo, the same story told a second time with the roles swapped. By early 1997, Christopher Wallace was in Los Angeles, deep in what everyone around him considered enemy territory, trying to do the thing Tupac never got the chance to do. He was trying to cool the war down. He was talking publicly about peace, about moving past the coasts, about ending the conflict that had swallowed his former friend. People who knew him say Pac's death had broken something in him too. The album he was finishing was called Life After Death. Then, in the early hours of March 9th, 1997, leaving a party in Los Angeles, Biggie's car stopped at a red light. Another car pulled up alongside it, and somebody opened fire. He was 24 years old. Life After Death came out 16 days later. Stop and feel the symmetry for a second. Two friends, both rappers, both shot from a passing vehicle while stopped at a light in a rival city, 6 months apart in their mid-20s. It is almost too neat to be real, as though the war they had built demanded both of them as payment. And for 27 years, officially, nobody knew who did either one. No arrests, no convictions. Two of the most famous murders in American music, and the files just sat there. Then, in September 2023, Las Vegas police arrested a man named Dwayne Davis, known as Kef D, and charged him with orchestrating Tupac's murder, Prosecutors allege he gave the order from inside that white Cadillac and that the motive was revenge for the beating in the MGM Grand lobby because the man on the floor of that lobby was his nephew. What makes the case strange is where it came from. Davis had spent years talking about that night, in police interviews and in a memoir he published in 2019. He has now pleaded not guilty, and his lawyers argue he made the whole account up to sell books. In that same memoir, he claimed Sean Combs had once offered him money to kill Tupac and Suge Knight. Combs has always denied it, no evidence has ever supported it, and Davis's own defense is now that he was lying. His trial begins on August 10th, 2026. So after 30 years, one of these two cases is finally going to be argued in front of a jury. Biggie's murder remains unsolved, and the question underneath both of them has never been answered. Were these two deaths connected? Was one revenge for the other? Or were they two separate tragedies that the story we all tell has been forcing together ever since? But the deepest tragedy here was never the mystery of who pulled the triggers. It is something a lot simpler and a lot sadder than that. It is what these two men were to each other before any of it started. So, after all of it, the war, the records, the two funerals, what is the part almost nobody sits with? It is this. Before Tupac Shakur and the notorious b.i.g. were the faces of the deadliest rivalry in music history, they were friends who genuinely loved each other. That is the part the headlines can't sell. Everyone remembers Hit 'Em Up. Everyone remembers the coasts and the beef and the two murders. Almost nobody remembers the couch Biggie slept on, or the stage Pac pulled him onto, or the advice, or the laughing, or two broke kids who saw a brother in each other before the industry and the labels in one terrible night in a New York lobby turned them into weapons. And that is what makes this a tragedy instead of a crime story, because none of it had to happen. Take away Suge Knight, take away Bad Boy and Death Row and Quad Studios and the machine that made money out of their rage, and what you are left with is two of the most gifted artists of their generation, who might have been the greatest collaboration this music ever had. Instead, they became each other's undoing, and both of them were gone before 30. Tupac believed his brother betrayed him. Maybe he was right, maybe he was wrong. We will probably never know for certain, and a courtroom in Las Vegas is not going to answer that part of it. But the cruelest possibility is also the simplest one, that two friends were turned against each other by people who had everything to gain from a war and everything to lose from peace. That is the side they never show you, not the beef, the brotherhood underneath it. These are the lives behind the lyrics, and the sides of them you are never shown. This is Rhyme Relics. Welcome to the archive.